The curse, they called it. A stain upon the royal bloodline, a shadow that had fallen over the House of Graves not with the slow creep of twilight, but with the violent, shattering force of a mirror dropped from a great height. King Sebastian Graves felt the shards of it in his own heart, a constant, grinding pain that 5 years had done nothing to dull. He stood before the great obsidian hearth in his private study, the fire within it sulking to embers, offering neither light nor warmth. It was a reflection of his own soul. Outside, a late autumn rain wept against the high, arched windows of the citadel, each drop a whispered accusation. It had happened 6 days ago. 6 days since the screams had echoed up from the kitchens, thin and sharp as splintered bone. He had been in a meeting with the Council of Elders, debating grain tariffs and the encroachment of iron-wielding mortals on their northern territories, matters of state that felt like dust and ashes in his mouth. Then the tremor had come, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the stone floors, followed by the screams. He had moved with a speed that was his birthright, a blur of black silk and cold fury, arriving in the kitchens to a scene of frozen chaos. 2 of the head cooks were slumped against a wall, their faces pale and their breathing shallow, untouched but for the terror in their eyes. A young scullery maid was crumpled on the floor, a lattice of fine black lines, like cracked porcelain, spreading across her arm where a wave of pure shadow had washed over her. And in the center of it all stood his children. Jasper, his small fists clenched, his face a mask of terrified rage, had a corona of writhing darkness pulsing around him. Nora, huddled behind her brother, was weeping silently, and with every tear that struck the flagstones, a patch of cold, light-devouring blackness bloomed and died. They were 5 years old. The royal physicians had assured him the staff would recover. The physical wounds were superficial, the shadow magic had been born of panic, not malice, and had dissipated quickly. But the wound to his house, to his legacy, was deep and festering. The whispers in the court had grown to a roar. Cursed. Unstable. A danger. Lord Valerus, his oldest and most severe adviser, had been blunt. They cannot remain together, Your Majesty. Their affliction feeds on itself. They must be separated, contained. For their own safety, and for the safety of the court. Sebastian's hand tightened on the marble mantelpiece, the cold of the stone a familiar, unwelcome comfort. Separate them. The words were a physical blow. Jasper and Nora were all he had left of Ilara. They had her eyes, her smile, the same stubborn set to her chin. And they had been born of her death, a tragic, brutal exchange of life that had left him hollowed out. He had looked at them in their cradle, 2 perfect, fragile beings, and felt not the swell of fatherly love, but the crushing weight of his failure. He had failed to protect their mother. And now, it seemed, he was failing to protect them from themselves. He had withdrawn. He knew it. The duties of a king were a convenient and all-consuming excuse. He provided for them, ensured their safety, their education, their every material need. But he did not know how to touch them without feeling the phantom touch of Ilara's cold hand. He did not know how to look into their eyes without seeing her dying gaze. The grief was a chasm between them, and his children, left alone on the other side, had filled that empty space with shadows. Another nanny had resigned this morning, the 7th in 2 years. She had left a tear-stained note on her pillow, professing her fear not of the children, but of the oppressive silence that surrounded them, the unnatural cold in the nursery wing. He couldn't blame her. The entire wing of the castle felt like a tomb, a monument to his loss. A soft knock came at the door. "Enter," he commanded, his voice rough. It was his steward, an ancient vampire named Alistair whose face was a roadmap of loyal service. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "The applicant has arrived. A Ms. Rachel Torres." Sebastian turned from the fire, his expression unreadable. He had reviewed her file with a detached sort of curiosity. She was human. Young, by his standards, not yet 30. Her references were impeccable, glowing with praise for her work with difficult children. But the children of mortal merchants were not the cursed heirs to a vampiric throne. "Send her in." He did not move to the grand desk that dominated the room. He remained by the hearth, a tall, unmoving silhouette against the dying light, a king carved from shadow and sorrow. He wanted her to see the coldness of this place from the very first moment. He wanted her to understand the weight of the task, so that when she inevitably fled, he could feel the sting of resignation, not surprise. The heavy oak doors opened, and she stepped inside. She was not what he had expected. He had pictured someone severe and grim, or perhaps someone young and easily frightened. Rachel Torres was neither. She was of average height, with warm, olive skin and dark, intelligent eyes that took in the cavernous study without a flicker of intimidation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, practical knot, and she wore a plain, well-made woolen dress the color of moss. There was a stillness about her, a scented calm that was jarringly out of place in the heart of his storm. She walked to the center of the room and offered a small, respectful curtsy. "Your Majesty. Thank you for seeing me." Her voice was steady, clear, and held a note of warmth that felt as alien in this room as a sunbeam. He finally turned to face her fully, his own eyes, the color of old blood and winter twilight, fixing on hers. He let the full force of his presence, the ancient power and profound grief that clung to him like a shroud, wash over her. He had seen hardened generals flinch from that gaze. Rachel Torres met it without wavering. Her expression was not one of defiance, but of quiet empathy. It was as if she were looking past the king and seeing the man, and what she saw did not frighten her. For the first time in a very long time, Sebastian felt a flicker of something other than grief or duty. He felt intrigue. "You have read the terms of the position, Ms. Torres," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to draw the shadows in the corners closer. "They are unique." "I have," she confirmed. "The children are described as possessing a volatile and dangerous affliction. They nearly killed 3 members of my staff last week," he stated, the words flat and cold. He was testing her, laying the unvarnished truth before her like a gauntlet. Rachel's gaze didn't falter. A flicker of sadness, not fear, crossed her features. "The report I was given said they were frightened. A pot had been dropped, there was a loud noise, and they reacted." Sebastian was taken aback by her directness, by her focus on the cause rather than the effect. The result was the same, regardless of the catalyst. "They are a danger. Children who are afraid often are," she replied softly. To themselves as much as to others. The simple, profound truth of her words struck him. He had been so consumed by the political fallout, by the curse, by his own guilt, that he had never once considered their fear. He had only seen the monstrous manifestation of it. He gestured to one of the high-backed chairs before the cold hearth. "Sit, Ms. Torres." She sat, her posture poised but not rigid. He remained standing, a deliberate assertion of power, yet he felt his own defenses beginning to crack. "Why do you want this position?" "The pay is considerable, but the risk is substantial." Rachel folded her hands in her lap. "I don't believe children are born broken, Your Majesty. I believe they become so when they are not given the tools to understand what is happening inside them. From what I have read, Prince Jasper and Princess Nora have experienced a great loss. And they have been left to navigate it alone." The accusation was gentle, almost unspoken, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Left alone. The words echoed the deepest fear in his heart, that his own grief had abandoned his children to their fate. He said nothing, his silence a heavy, damning confession. "Power without understanding is chaos," Rachel continued, her voice earnest. "Whether it's the power of a king, or the power of a child's emotions. Or," she added, her gaze steady and knowing, "the power of magic. I don't see a curse. I see 2 very small, very powerful children who are hurting, and who have never been taught what to do with that hurt." He stared at her, this mortal woman with her clear eyes and her unnerving insight. She spoke of his children's magic as if it were an emotion to be managed, not a sickness to be cured or contained. It was a perspective so radically different from that of his advisors, from his own terrified conclusions, that it left him momentarily speechless. She was offering not a solution, but a path. A difficult, uncertain path that led directly through the heart of the pain he had spent 5 years avoiding. "The court demands they be separated," he said, the words tasting like ash. "They believe their proximity amplifies the danger." "Separating them would be like tearing a single person in 2, Rachel said, her voice firm with conviction. It would confirm their deepest fear, that they are broken, that they are wrong, and that they are truly alone. Whatever this power is, they share it. The solution cannot be to isolate them. It must be to teach them how to hold it, together. He felt the truth of her words resonate in the hollow space in his chest. Jasper and Nora were never apart. They slept in the same room, though they had their own. They ate from the same plate if allowed. They were two halves of a whole, and the thought of severing that bond was, in its own way, as monstrous as the magic they wielded. "What is it you propose to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I propose to listen," she said simply. "To create a space where they feel safe enough to be afraid, or sad, or angry, without believing they will be punished for it. I want to give their feelings names, and then show them how to hold those feelings without letting them spill over. I want to get to know your children, Your Majesty. Not the affliction. The children." He looked away from her, toward the rain-streaked window. The world outside was a blur of grey and black. For 5 years, his world had been those colors. This woman, with her quiet confidence and her impossible hope, spoke of another way. A way that required more courage than facing down an army. It required him to face himself. "The position is yours, Ms. Torres," he said, the decision solidifying in his mind. It was a desperate gamble, a last resort before he submitted to the demands of his court and shattered what was left of his family. "The nursery wing is yours to command. You will have whatever resources you require. But I warn you, if there is another incident, I will not be able to protect you from the consequences. Or them." Rachel rose from her chair. "I understand, Your Majesty. All I ask in return is your trust. And your patience." He finally met her eyes again. "Patience is a virtue I have in abundance, Ms. Torres. It is hope that is in short supply." "Then I shall have to bring enough for all of us," she replied, and with another small curtsy, she turned and left the study, leaving Sebastian Graves alone with the dying embers and the first, terrifying flicker of a feeling he had thought long dead. The nursery wing was less a home for children and more a beautiful, gilded cage. Rachel stood in the doorway of the central playroom, taking it all in. The ceilings were impossibly high, painted with a faded mural of cherubs and clouds. The furniture was exquisite, carved from dark, heavy wood and upholstered in deep velvets, miniature replicas of the funereal grandeur that marked the rest of the castle. Toys were arranged with military precision on shelves that were far too high for small hands to reach. A magnificent rocking horse, its eyes made of polished jet, stood perfectly still in one corner, as if it had never been ridden. The air was cold and still, thick with the scent of beeswax and a profound, echoing loneliness. There was no clutter, no mess, no sign that children actually lived here. It was a museum of a childhood, not the space for one. Alistair, the ancient steward, stood beside her, his posture rigid. "The princess and the prince are in their room. They have refused their lunch." "Thank you, Alistair," Rachel said softly. "Would you mind having the kitchen send up a simple tray? Some bread, cheese, sliced apples, and a pot of warm milk with a little honey and cinnamon." Alistair raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. "Their dietary regimen is quite strict, Ms. Torres. It is overseen by the royal physicians." "I'm sure it is," Rachel said with a gentle smile. "But today, I think comfort is more important than regimen. If you would." Her tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. Alistair gave a stiff nod and retreated, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floors. Rachel took a deep breath, steeling herself, and walked toward the closed door of the children's bedroom. She knocked softly. "Nora? Jasper? My name is Rachel. May I come in?" There was no answer. Only a profound, listening silence from the other side of the door. She waited a moment longer before speaking again. "I've been told you didn't eat your lunch. I thought you might be hungry later. I've asked for some snacks to be brought up for us." Still nothing. She didn't push. Instead, she turned her attention to the playroom. She began, piece by piece, to dismantle the sterile perfection. She pulled a low table and 2 small chairs into the center of the room. She went to the high shelves and, with some effort, managed to bring down a wooden box of building blocks, a set of worn-looking picture books, and a basket of soft, woolen animals. She arranged them on a rug before the fireplace, which she noted was swept clean but empty. She was clearing a space on the table when the bedroom door creaked open a few inches. A pair of wide, dark eyes, identical to their father's but filled with a child's raw caution, peered out at her. It was Nora. Her dark hair was a wild tangle around her small, pale face. Rachel didn't turn immediately. She continued her work, pretending not to notice, giving the child space to observe without feeling watched. "I thought we could have our snack in here," she said to the room at large. "It seems a bit cozier." The door opened a little wider. Jasper now stood beside his sister, a mirror image in miniature. He was a fraction taller, his expression not just cautious, but openly defiant. A faint shimmer, like heat haze, wavered in the air around his clenched fists. He was the protector. Rachel finally turned, a slow, deliberate movement. She offered them a small, calm smile and crouched down to their level, an act of deference that immediately altered the power dynamic of the room. "Hello, Jasper. Hello, Nora. It's nice to meet you properly." They stared at her, their silence a shield. They had seen nannies come and go. They knew the pattern, the forced smiles, the underlying fear, the eventual retreat. "Are you going to leave, too?" Jasper asked, his voice small but edged with steel. Rachel met his gaze directly. "No," she said simply. "I'm not." "They all leave," Nora whispered, her voice a fragile thing. "I'm sorry to hear that," Rachel said, her tone filled with genuine sympathy. "That must be very hard." Her answer seemed to surprise them. She wasn't making false promises or dismissing their feelings. She was acknowledging their reality. A tray appeared silently at the door, carried by a nervous-looking servant who set it on a nearby table and vanished as quickly as he had come. "Ah, good," Rachel said brightly. "Our snack is here." "I'm starving." She poured 3 small mugs of the warm, fragrant milk and set them on the low table with the plate of food. She sat on one of the small chairs and took a sip from her own mug, making a soft sound of appreciation. She didn't press them to join her. She simply created an invitation and waited. For a long time, the twins remained in the doorway, watching her. They were like 2 wild fawns, poised to bolt at the slightest unexpected movement. Rachel ate a slice of apple, then picked up one of the picture books. It was a story about a lost star finding its way back to its constellation. She began to read aloud, her voice soft and even, narrating the little star's fear and loneliness. Slowly, hesitantly, Nora took a step into the room, drawn by the story. Jasper's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, but she gently pulled away. She crept toward the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the book in Rachel's hands. Jasper followed, his body a tense line of suspicion, placing himself between his sister and this new, strange woman. Rachel never stopped reading. She turned a page, her eyes flicking up to acknowledge their presence before returning to the book. She pushed a mug of milk a little closer to where Nora had settled on the rug. After a few more pages, Nora's small hand reached out and curled around the warm ceramic. She took a tentative sip, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Jasper watched his sister, his internal battle plain on his face. The desire to protect her ward with the pull of the warmth, the story, the quiet calm that filled the room. Finally, he too sat, though he kept a careful distance, his arms wrapped around his knees. The faint shimmer of shadow around his hands had disappeared. When Rachel finished the story, she closed the book gently. "It's hard being lost," she said quietly, not looking at them directly, but at the book's cover. "It makes you feel alone, even if someone is right beside you." Nora nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Jasper remained silent, but his gaze was fixed on Rachel's face, his defiance replaced by a deep, searching curiosity. "I have an idea," Rachel said, getting to her feet. She went to the windows and drew back the heavy velvet curtains, letting the grey afternoon light flood the room. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were beginning to break. "This room feels a little quiet. I think it needs some life." She retrieved a large roll of paper and a box of charcoal sticks from her bag. She spread the paper across the floor. "I was thinking this wall," she said, pointing to a large, empty expanse, looks very bare. I think it needs a forest. A big, magical forest. What do you think? The twins stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. No one had ever suggested drawing on the walls. We're not allowed, Jasper stated. It's destructive. It's not destructive, Rachel corrected gently. It's creative. And this is your space. It should look and feel like you. She picked up a piece of charcoal. I'm not very good at trees. I always make them too wobbly. She drew a deliberately crooked, silly-looking tree. See? Terrible. I bet you two could do much better. She set the charcoal down and went back to her chair, picking up her milk. She didn't coax or cajole. The invitation was there, lying on the floor, a blank world waiting to be filled. Nora was the first to move. She crawled over to the paper, her curiosity overriding her conditioning. She picked up a charcoal stick, her small fingers clumsy at first. She looked at Rachel, then at Jasper. Then, she drew a flower. It wasn't a perfect flower, it was lopsided, with too many petals. But as she drew it, a tiny wisp of shadow, no bigger than a butterfly, detached from her fingertips and danced over the paper, deepening the black of the charcoal before vanishing. Her eyes widened in alarm. She looked at Rachel, expecting a reprimand, fear. Rachel simply smiled. That's a beautiful flower, Nora. It looks like a moon petal. Reassured, Nora drew another. This time, when the wisp of shadow appeared, she didn't flinch. Jasper, seeing that there was no scolding, no panic, moved to the paper as well. He didn't draw a flower. He drew a wolf, fierce and protective, with sharp, angular lines. As he drew its eyes, two pinpricks of darkness flared around his own hand, solidifying the charcoal into a deep, velvety black that seemed to absorb the light. He stared at it, his breath catching. It was the magic. But it hadn't broken anything. It hadn't hurt anyone. It had just helped him draw. For the next hour, they worked in silence, a new kind of silence, filled not with emptiness but with shared creation. Rachel watched as they slowly, cautiously, began to fill the paper with a world of their own making. A forest of crooked trees and impossible flowers grew under their hands. They drew a two-tailed fox, a grumper-looking badger, and a flock of birds with stars for eyes. And with every line they drew, small, harmless flares of their magic would manifest, emphasizing a line here, deepening a shadow there. It was a part of their expression, as natural as the charcoal on their fingers. Rachel felt a profound sense of hope settle in her chest. This was it. This was the key. Their power wasn't a curse to be severed, it was a language they had never been taught how to speak. Today, they had spoken their first words. And she had been there to listen. Days turned into a week, and the nursery wing began to transform. The first and most crucial change was trust. Rachel established a rhythm that was predictable and safe, a bulwark against the chaos that had ruled the children's lives. Mornings were for quiet lessons, afternoons for creative expression, and evenings for stories by the fire. She had insisted the hearth in the playroom be used, and the warm, crackling flames did more to chase away the chill than any amount of royal heating ever could. The great forest mural, now taped to the wall, expanded daily, a testament to the world burgeoning inside them. Rachel learned to read the weather of their emotions. She saw how Jasper's frustration over a block tower that wouldn't stand straight would cause the shadows in the corners of the room to sharpen, to grow long and pointed. She saw how Nora's sadness over a character in a story would make the air grow heavy and cold. The old nannies would have reacted to the magic, to the physical manifestation of the curse. They would have tried to stop it. Rachel reacted to the feeling behind it. It's frustrating when things don't work the way you want them to, isn't it? She would say to Jasper, her voice calm. She wouldn't look at the shadows, she would look at him. It makes you feel tight and angry inside, like a coiled spring. She'd hold out her hands. Show me. Show me what the anger feels like in your hands. At first, he had refused, terrified of what might happen. But she was patient. One afternoon, he finally held out his trembling hands. A knot of agitated darkness swirled between his palms. It feels like this, he whispered, ashamed. I see, Rachel said, her eyes soft with understanding. It looks very busy and sharp. What happens if we try to smooth it out? Like we're smoothing clay, she made a slow, gentle motion with her own hands. Hesitantly, Jasper mimicked her. He focused on the feeling not of anger, but of the motion. The knot of shadow began to lose its sharp edges, softening into a swirling grey mist before dissipating completely. The pointed shadows in the corners of the room retracted. Jasper stared at his empty hands, his eyes wide with a dawning sense of wonder. He had not suppressed the magic. He had soothed it. With Nora, the approach was different. Her magic was quieter, more insidious. It was the magic of grief. It would manifest as a sudden, unnatural silence, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Things would seem to fade, their colors leaching away until the world was a wash of gray. "It feels like Mom is gone," Nora whispered one day, huddled in a large armchair, her favorite stuffed bear clutched to her chest. The vibrant colors of the rug around her feet had muted to shades of dust. Rachel knelt beside her. "That's a very big, very heavy feeling, isn't it? It's okay to feel sad that you miss her." She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say it would be okay. She sat with the child in her sadness. "Sometimes," Rachel said softly, "when a feeling is too big, it helps to give it a place to be. It doesn't have to fill up the whole room. It can be small." She picked up a beautiful, empty glass snow globe from a shelf. "What if we put the sadness in here for a little while? We can still see it, and we know it's there. But it won't have to cover everything else." Nora watched, her expression doubtful. Rachel held the globe. "Just think about the feeling. The missing. And imagine it's a soft, grey mist. And you can pour it into here." Nora closed her eyes. She pictured her mother, a woman she knew only from a single, sad-eyed portrait in the West Hall. She pictured the empty space beside her father. She felt the ache in her own chest. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and as it fell, a swirl of pearlescent grey mist flowed from her and was drawn into the glass globe. Inside the globe, the mist swirled like a captive cloud. And in the room, the color slowly seeped back into the rug. Nora stared at the globe, then at Rachel. A fragile smile touched her lips. "It's not so heavy now." "No," Rachel agreed. "And when you want to feel it, you can hold it. And when you need to put it down, you can put it here. It's yours to control." Sebastian observed this transformation from a distance. He received Alistair's daily reports, which grew increasingly incredulous. "Ms. Torres requested finger paints. Your Majesty." Ms. Torres and the children spent the afternoon making mud pies in the West Garden. There have been no incidents. He found himself walking past the nursery wing more often, pausing outside the door, listening. He heard something he had not heard in 5 years, the sound of his children's laughter. It was a hesitant, fragile sound at first, but it was real. One evening, drawn by an irresistible pull, he pushed the door open a crack and looked inside. The room was unrecognizable. The furniture had been rearranged to create cozy nooks. The children's drawings were everywhere. And in the center of it all, bathed in the warm light of the fire, sat Rachel on the floor, his children nestled on either side of her. Jasper was leaning against her shoulder, fast asleep, his face peaceful for the first time Sebastian could remember. Nora was listening, her eyes wide, as Rachel read from a book. The scene was one of such profound peace, such simple, domestic warmth, that it stole the breath from his lungs. It was a portrait of a family. A life he had thought was lost to him forever. He saw Rachel gently brush a stray lock of hair from Jasper's forehead, her touch infinitely tender. And in that moment, Sebastian was struck by a powerful, painful realization. This human woman was giving his children something he, their father, their king, had been utterly incapable of providing, a sense of safety. A home within the cold stone walls of his castle and his heart. He saw Nora's eyelids begin to droop. Rachel finished her sentence, closed the book, and looked down at the sleeping children. A smile of such genuine, unreserved affection touched her lips that Sebastian felt his own cold, still heart give a painful lurch. He had been watching her as an employer, an observer, a king. But now, he saw her as something else entirely. He saw a woman of incredible strength and compassion, a woman who had walked into the heart of his family's darkness and had, with nothing more than patience and understanding, lit a candle. He backed away from the door silently, retreating to the shadows of the corridor before he could be seen. He felt a complex and unsettling mix of emotions: gratitude, shame, and a deep, aching longing. Shame that he had been so blinded by his own pain that he had failed his children so completely. Gratitude that this stranger had succeeded where he had failed. And longing, a longing for the warmth of that fire, for the simple peace of that room, for the right to be the one his children leaned on as they slept. He had built walls around his heart to protect himself from more pain, but now he saw that those walls had become a prison, and he had locked his children inside it with him. Rachel Torres had just shown him that there was a door. He only had to find the courage to walk through it. The summons came on a Tuesday. A crisp, formal note delivered by Alistair, requesting Rachel's presence in the king's study that afternoon. A feeling of quiet apprehension settled over her. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, 3 weeks of slow, painstaking progress. The children were blooming under her care. The overt manifestations of their magic had all but ceased, replaced by a subtle, integrated expression that was becoming a part of their play and their art. They were learning to name their feelings, to hold them, to soothe them. But Rachel knew that the court was not composed of patient observers. They would want results, not progress. They would want a cure, not a process. She entered the study to find Sebastian not by the fire, but standing by the great rain-streaked window, staring out at the grey courtyard. He looked tired, the lines of strain around his eyes deeper than she remembered. He was still a formidable, intimidating presence, but for the first time, she saw the fragility beneath the royal veneer. He was a man carrying an impossible burden. "Your Majesty," she said, offering her customary curtsy. He turned, and his gaze was heavy. "Ms. Torres. The council is growing, impatient. Lord Valerus in particular. He feels this experiment of yours has gone on long enough. He demands a formal assessment. He wants proof that the curse is contained." Rachel's heart sank. They don't understand. It isn't something to be contained, like a beast in a cage. It's a part of them. The more they try to cage it, the more violently it will fight to get out. "I am aware of that," Sebastian said, his voice low. "I have seen the change in them. I have heard them laugh." The admission was quiet, almost raw. But Valerus sees only the lack of catastrophe. He calls it a lull. He is convinced that the moment they are faced with a genuine stressor, they will erupt as they did before. "Then he is mistaken," Rachel stated, her own voice firm with a conviction born of hours spent on the nursery floor. "They are stronger now. They have tools they didn't have before." "Prove it," Sebastian said, the words a challenge. He has demanded a demonstration. He wants to see the children. To question them. A cold knot of fear formed in Rachel's stomach. A demonstration. Like they were animals in a circus. To put Nora and Jasper, who were still so fragile, under the cold, scrutinizing gaze of Lord Valerus and the council, it was the very definition of a genuine stressor. It was a test designed to make them fail. "No," she said, the word escaping her before she could temper it. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, that is a terrible idea. It would undo all our work. They don't perform on command. Their control is tied to their emotional state. Putting them in a stressful, frightening situation is the one thing that might actually cause an incident. And yet, I cannot refuse him forever," Sebastian countered, his frustration evident. "He speaks for a powerful faction of the court, one that believes the children are a threat to the stability of the throne. To them, your methods are foolishly sentimental, and I am a fool for allowing them." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of profound weariness. "They see me as a king weakened by grief, incapable of making the hard decisions." Rachel took a step forward, her professional deference giving way to a more personal urgency. "Then let me speak to him. Let me explain the process. Let me show him my notes, my observations." Sebastian gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Valerus doesn't care for your observations. He is a man who believes in power and control. He will see your methods as the ramblings of a naive human who does not understand the darkness she is meddling with." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "He will not listen to you. But he may listen to me." The unspoken thought hung in the air between them. Sebastian was considering defending her, defending the children, against his own counsel. It would be a significant political risk. "What do you believe, Your Majesty?" Rachel asked softly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Do you believe they are cursed? Or do you believe they are grieving?" The question was direct, leaving him no room for evasion. He had been skirting the edges of this truth for weeks, observing from the shadows, wrestling with the implications. To accept Rachel's theory was to accept his own role in his children's suffering. It was to admit that their dangerous magic was not a random blight, but a direct consequence of his own emotional abandonment. It was a heavy, terrible weight of guilt. But to deny it was to deny the evidence of his own eyes, the sound of his own children's laughter. He walked slowly from the window to his desk, his fingers tracing the intricate carving on its edge. When Alara died, he began, his voice rough with an emotion he had kept locked away for 5 years, "The light went out of my world. I looked at them, and all I could see was what I had lost. I saw the price of their lives. I could not bear it." He finally looked at Rachel, his eyes filled with a pain so profound it was almost tangible. "I thought I was protecting them by keeping my distance. I thought I was sparing them from the shadow of my grief. But I was wrong." He took a deep breath, the sound shuddering in the quiet room. "You have shown me that. I did not give them a curse. I gave them my silence. And they filled it with their own power, their own pain. You are right, Ms. Torres. They are not cursed. They are my children. And they are hurting." The confession felt like a seismic shift in the room, in the very foundations of the castle. For 5 years, he had been King Sebastian Graves, the stoic, grieving monarch. In that moment, he was simply Sebastian. A father admitting his failure. Rachel felt a wave of empathy for him so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes. He was not a monster of cold indifference. He was a man shattered by loss, who had forgotten how to live. "It's not too late," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It is never too late to start again." A newfound resolve hardened his features, chasing away some of the weariness. "Valerus will have his meeting," he said. "But it will be on my terms. Not a demonstration. A conversation. And you will be there. And so will I." He looked at her, and for the first time, she felt like they were not employer and employee, but partners. Allies. "He wants to see if the children are a threat to the throne. I will show him that they are the throne. And they are not to be trifled with." He straightened to his full, regal height, the king returning to inhabit the man. But something was different. The power he projected was no longer just the cold, ancient authority of his bloodline. It was tempered with the fierce, protective fire of a father who had finally chosen his children. "Tell me what you need," he commanded. "Tell me how to prepare them. Tell me how to help." The day of the council meeting arrived cloaked in a persistent, drizzling rain that matched the nervous tension within the castle walls. The chamber was a place of imposing formality, dominated by a long, polished table of dark wood. Lord Valerus and 3 other elders were already seated, their faces grim and unyielding. Valerus, with his severe, hawkish features and eyes as cold as chipped flint, radiated an aura of impatient authority. Sebastian entered first, a silent, commanding presence. He did not take his seat at the head of the table. Instead, he stood beside it, waiting. A moment later, Rachel entered, holding Nora's hand in her right and Jasper's in her left. The children were dressed in simple but formal velvet tunics, their faces clean, their hair neatly brushed. They looked small and fragile in the vast, intimidating chamber. Jasper's hand was gripping Rachel's so tightly his knuckles were white, and Nora had pressed herself against Rachel's side. Their eyes were wide as they took in the stern faces of the elders. "Your Majesty," Valerus said, his voice a dry rustle of disapproval. "I must protest the presence of the nanny. This is a matter for the council." "Ms. Torres is here at my invitation," Sebastian stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She is the foremost expert on the matter at hand. Her presence is non-negotiable." He gestured to 2 smaller chairs that had been placed beside his own. "Come," he said softly to the children. Rachel led them to the chairs. Jasper and Nora sat, their feet not quite touching the floor. The air in the room was thick with unspoken judgment. Rachel could feel the children's anxiety like a physical pressure. The shadows under the great table seemed to deepen, and a faint chill began to creep into the air. It was Nora's fear, leaching the warmth from the room. Valerus's eyes narrowed, noticing the subtle shift. He saw it as proof of his theory. As you can see, he began, his voice laced with grim satisfaction, their mere presence in a stressful environment is enough to trigger the affliction. Before Rachel could speak, Sebastian held up a hand. He ignored Valerus and knelt down, placing himself at eye level with his children. It was a shocking breach of protocol. A king did not kneel. But he was not a king in that moment. He was a father. Nora, he said, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. I know this room is big and these men look very grumpy. One of the younger elders had the grace to look embarrassed. Valerus's expression soured further. It's all right to feel scared. Your heart might be beating very fast, like a hummingbird's wings. Nora nodded, her eyes fixed on her father's face. The fact that he was here, with them, speaking to them, was a powerful anchor in the stormy atmosphere. Remember what Rachel taught you, he continued softly. When the feeling gets too big, we give it a place. We don't have the snow globe, but you can hold it in your hands. A small, quiet piece of cold. Can you do that? Nora looked at her hands. She took a shuddering breath and closed her eyes for a second. The ambient chill in the room receded, concentrating into a faint, shimmering cold that hovered over her cupped palms before fading into nothingness. She had not banished the fear, but she had held it. She had controlled it. Valerus watched, momentarily speechless. He had expected an eruption, a loss of control. He had not expected this quiet, deliberate act of self-regulation. Sebastian then turned to Jasper, who was staring at Valerus with undisguised hostility. A dark, angry energy was beginning to gather around the boy's feet, making the candlelight flicker. Jasper, Sebastian said, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. I see you are angry. You want to protect your sister. That is a good and noble thing. It is the heart of a king. The praise caught Jasper off guard, his anger faltering. But a king must be wise, Sebastian continued. His anger is a sword. He does not draw it for every perceived slight. He keeps it in its sheath until it is truly needed. Can you feel the anger? The sharp points of it? Jasper nodded, his jaw tight. Sheath it, Sebastian commanded softly. Put it away for now. You are safe here. I am here. Jasper looked from his father's steady eyes to Valerus's scowling face. He took a deep, shaky breath, and the agitated shadows around his feet smoothed out, pulling back into nothing. He unclenched his fists. Sebastian rose and turned to face his council. His expression was thunderous. You wished for a demonstration, my lords. You have it. You have seen not a curse, but courage. You have seen not an affliction, but discipline. These are the heirs to my throne. They are not monsters to be feared. They are children who have learned to master a power you cannot begin to comprehend. He walked to the head of the table and finally took his seat, the very picture of royal authority. Ms. Torres has not been indulging them. She has been training them. She has given them what I, in my grief, failed to provide, understanding. The incidents you so fear were born of loneliness and terror. They were a cry for help. And instead of answering it, we debated caging them. His gaze swept over the elders, sharp and accusing. That failure is mine. But it ends today. He leaned forward. Nora and Jasper will not be separated. They will not be confined. They will be raised here, at my side. They will be taught to wield their power with wisdom and compassion, so that they may one day rule with the same. Their magic is not a weakness of our bloodline. It is its future. A future you will either embrace, or you will find yourselves replaced by those who will. The threat was unmistakable, and it hung in the air with the weight of an executioner's axe. The elders shifted in their seats. They had come expecting to corner a weakened king. They were facing a monarch reborn, resolute and formidable. Valerus, ever defiant, made one last stand. And what of this human? He sneered, gesturing at Rachel. How long until her influence pollutes their worldview? Until they forget the strength and severity required of our kind? Ms. Torres has demonstrated more strength in 1 month than you have in a decade, Valerus, Sebastian countered, his voice dangerously soft. She has shown that true strength is not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. She has my complete and total confidence. She is not merely the royal nanny. She is an advisor to the crown on these matters, and you will afford her the respect that title commands. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We are finished here. Rachel, who had watched the entire exchange with a kind of breathless awe, gathered the children's hands. As they walked from the chamber, leaving the stunned and silent council in their wake, Jasper looked up at his father, his eyes shining with an emotion Sebastian had never seen directed at him before, pride. You were like a lion, Jasper whispered. Sebastian looked down at his son, and a genuine smile, the first in 5 years, touched his lips. It felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. He reached down and, for the first time without hesitation, without the ghost of Alara between them, he ruffled Jasper's hair. And you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, are my cub. The anniversary of Alara's death had always been a day of profound and suffocating silence in the castle. The staff moved with hushed reverence, the curtains remained drawn, and Sebastian would lock himself in his study, communing with a ghost. But this year, the 5th year, was different. The silence was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, shared anticipation, a sense of something waiting to be acknowledged. Rachel found the children in the playroom, sitting before the hearth. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and they were staring into the embers, their faces somber. The great forest mural on the wall behind them seemed darker today, the charcoal shadows deeper and more melancholy. Nora was holding the glass snow globe, the grey mist of her sadness swirling gently within. Jasper sat beside her, not touching her, but his presence a small, solid bastion of support. Today is the day Mom died, Nora said without looking up as Rachel approached. I know, Rachel said softly, sitting on the rug with them. It's a hard day. Father locks his door, Jasper said, his voice flat. He doesn't want to see us today. The words were a simple statement of fact, but they carried the weight of years of reinforcement. On this day, of all days, the chasm between them felt the widest. I don't think he doesn't want to see you, Rachel corrected gently. I think he doesn't know how. This day is full of big, heavy feelings for him, too. Maybe the biggest and heaviest of all. A profound sadness settled over the three of them. Outside, the sky was a seamless sheet of white, threatening a snow that had not yet begun to fall. It was a world holding its breath. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the floor, a low, deep hum that made the glass in the windows vibrate. It was not violent, but it was pervasive, a wave of pure, undirected energy. Nora gasped, and the snow globe in her hands grew intensely cold, frosting over from the inside. Jasper shot to his feet, and the shadows around him writhed, coiling like startled snakes. The source was not them. It was coming from the king's study. Stay here, Rachel said, her voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. She hurried out of the nursery wing and down the long, silent corridor. The hum grew stronger as she approached the study, the very air vibrating with a power that felt like grief given physical form. The ornate wooden doors were rattling in their frame. She could feel waves of cold emanating from within. She knocked sharply. Your Majesty. Sebastian. There was no answer, only a low moan of despair from within, a sound of such utter brokenness that it chilled her to the bone. The power pulsing from the room was immense, chaotic. It was the same magic the children wielded, but magnified 100-fold, raw and uncontrolled. She realized with a jolt of understanding, the curse wasn't from Alara. It wasn't a flaw in the children. It was his. It was the Graves family magic, a power intrinsically tied to their deepest emotions. And the king's grief was a bottomless ocean. Without hesitating, she tried the handle. It was locked. Alistair, she called, her voice sharp. The steward appeared as if from the shadows, his face a mask of alarm. Open this door. Now. He fumbled with a set of ancient keys, his hands trembling. Ms. Torres, it is forbidden. He is going to bring the castle down, she said, her voice cutting through his protest. Open it. The lock clicked, and she pushed the door open. The room was in chaos. Books had flown from the shelves, papers swirled in a vortex of wind, and the great hearth was choked with a roiling mass of pure shadow. In the center of the room, Sebastian was on his knees, his head in his hands, his body racked with tremors. The raw, untamed magic of his grief was pouring out of him, a storm of sorrow that was shaking the citadel to its foundations. He was lost, drowning in 5 years of repressed pain. But Rachel did not run. She walked into the storm. She had to shout to be heard over the psychic roar. Sebastian, look at me. He didn't seem to hear her. His eyes were closed, lost in a memory of blood and loss. She knew she could not reach him alone. She turned and ran back to the nursery. The children were huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Your father needs you, she said, her voice urgent but steady. His sadness is too big for him to hold by himself. We have to help him. But his magic. Jasper whispered, frightened. His magic is just like yours, Rachel insisted, kneeling before them. It's just a feeling that has gotten too big. But together, we are stronger than the sadness. You know how to do this. You know how to hold the feeling without letting it break everything. Will you help me? They looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. They had spent their lives afraid of this power, their own and the echoes of their fathers. But Rachel had taught them it was not a monster. It was a part of them. With a shared, determined nod, they each took one of her hands. The three of them walked back into the study, a small island of calm in the raging tempest of the king's grief. The force of his magic was a physical blow, a wall of cold and despair. But they pushed through it. Sebastian. Rachel called again, her voice clear and strong. You are not alone in this. He can't hear you, Nora whispered, her small body trembling. The sadness is too loud. Then we have to show him, Rachel said. She looked at the children. Let's make a light. Not a bright one. A soft one. Like a candle in the dark. Think of a happy memory. Any 1 inch. She closed her eyes and thought of the first time she had heard the children laugh. A tiny, warm mote of light appeared in her palm. It was human magic, small and fragile, but it was there. Nora thought of her father kneeling before her in the council chamber, calling her brave. A soft, silvery light, cool as moonlight, bloomed in her hand. Jasper thought of his father's hand on his head, praising him. A steady, protective golden light, warm as the fire, ignited in his. Holding hands, they walked closer. Their 3 small lights merged, pushing back the oppressive darkness. Sebastian finally looked up, his eyes unfocused, hollow with pain. He saw the 3 figures approaching him through the swirling shadows, their combined light a beacon in his personal hell. Ilara, he choked out, mistaking them for a vision. No, father, Nora said, her voice trembling but clear. It's us. They reached him, and Rachel gently guided the children's hands to their father's shoulders. Their touch was tentative at first, then firm. We're here, Jasper said, his voice surprisingly strong. You don't have to hold it by yourself. As their hands rested on him, their own magic, calm and controlled, flowed into him. It was not a counterforce, not a dam against his grief. It was an offering of support. It was a network of roots steadying a storm-tossed tree. They were not trying to stop his pain. They were sharing the burden of it. Sebastian stared at them, his children, their faces illuminated by the gentle light they wielded. He saw not the price of his loss, but the legacy of his love. They were not a reminder of Ilara's death. They were the proof of her life. The storm of his grief did not vanish. It quieted. The swirling shadows calmed, the psychic roar subsided. The untamed ocean of his sorrow became a deep, still lake. Tears, hot and real, finally fell from his eyes. He reached out, his hands shaking, and pulled his children into his arms, burying his face in their hair. He held them not as a king, not as a symbol, but as a father. And they held him back. Rachel stepped away, giving them their space, her own eyes wet with tears. The 3 of them knelt together on the floor of the ruined study, a broken family beginning, at last, to piece itself back together. The light from their hands faded, no longer needed. The shadows in the room were no longer a threat. They were just shadows, waiting for the dawn. In the weeks that followed, the castle began to breathe again. The change was palpable. The oppressive silence was replaced by the sound of children's footsteps echoing in the halls, no longer confined to their wing. The heavy curtains were drawn back, and sunlight, even the pale light of winter, was allowed to stream in. The atmosphere of the court shifted from one of fear and suspicion to one of cautious, disbelieving wonder. They saw their king walking in the gardens with his children, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. They heard him laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the dust from the castle's ancient stones. Sebastian had changed. The wall of grief he had built around himself had not vanished, but it now had doors and windows. He began to share memories of Alara with the children, painting a portrait for them of the vibrant, laughing woman she had been, not just the tragic figure of her death. He told them how she had loved to dance in the rain, how she had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway, how she had believed that magic was just the world's way of showing its joy. In sharing her with them, he found he could finally mourn her without being consumed by her loss. His relationship with his children was reforged in these shared moments. He learned the specific cadence of Nora's thoughts, the fierce loyalty that burned in Jasper's heart. He discovered that Nora had a mischievous sense of humor and that Jasper was a surprisingly gifted strategist at chess. He was not just their king or their protector, he was becoming their father, present and engaged. Their magic, now understood and accepted, flourished. It became a language of emotion they all shared. When Jasper was excited, sparks of golden light would dance at his fingertips. When Nora was feeling particularly content, the shadows in the room would soften and take on a velvety, comforting texture. Sebastian, too, began to understand his own power. He no longer fought the waves of sadness when they came. He acknowledged them, let them wash over him, and found that they receded on their own, leaving a peaceful calm in their wake. Through it all, Rachel was the steady, quiet center. She had seamlessly transitioned from Nanny to something more integral, a confidant and partner to Sebastian in the healing of his family. She no longer took her meals in the nursery but with the family in their private dining room. Her counsel was sought not just on matters concerning the children, but on larger court issues. Her emotional intelligence and calm, human perspective proved to be an invaluable asset. The elders, even Valerus, had come to treat her with a grudging respect. She had, after all, saved their king and secured their future. One evening, after the children were asleep, Sebastian found her in the castle library, a vast, circular room lined with millennia of collected knowledge. She was curled in a worn leather armchair by the fire, a book open in her lap, though she was staring into the flames, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Alistair tells me you requested a treatise on pre-modern agricultural reform," he said, his voice a low, amused rumble. Rachel looked up, a small smile touching her lips. "I was curious. Your kingdom's crop rotation methods are fascinatingly archaic." He chuckled and sat in the chair opposite her. The firelight danced on their faces, casting them in warm, flickering tones. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that exists only between people who have weathered a great storm together. "I have never properly thanked you," Sebastian said, his voice serious now. "You saved them, Rachel. You saved all of us." "You did the saving," she corrected softly. "You were the one who had to walk through the door. I just pointed it out to you." "I had been staring at that door for 5 years and never saw it," he admitted. "I was blind. Thank you for giving me back my children. For giving me back myself. It has been a privilege to watch you all heal," she said, her voice sincere. "To see this castle fill with life again." He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the nanny or the advisor, but as the woman who had brought light back into his world. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes, the quiet strength in the set of her jaw, the compassion that radiated from her like warmth from the fire. He had spent so long in the cold that her warmth felt like a miracle. "This is more than a castle," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "It is a home. And you, Rachel Torres, are the reason for that. You have become the heart of this place." Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I am glad I could help. But my work here is largely done. The children are happy, they are safe. You are the father they need. Soon, it will be time for me to move on. The words struck Sebastian with the force of a physical blow. The thought of this place without her calm presence, her steady voice, her warm smile, it was unthinkable. The silence would return. The cold would creep back in. He realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that his healing was not complete. It had only just begun, and it was inextricably linked to her. She was not just the architect of his family's recovery, she was becoming a vital part of its future. No, he said, the word sharp with an emotion he hadn't yet dared to name. He leaned forward, his garnet eyes intense. Your work here is not done. Unless you wish to leave. Rachel looked down at the book in her lap, her heart beating a little faster. She had been telling herself for weeks that her role was temporary. She was a human in a world of ancient, powerful beings. She was a commoner in a king's court. She did not belong here permanently. And yet, the thought of leaving, of saying goodbye to Nora and Jasper, of never again sharing a quiet moment with Sebastian by the fire, it was a physical ache in her chest. This castle, this family, had become her home, too. I don't wish to leave, she whispered, the admission costing her a great deal. But I don't know what my place is here anymore. Your place, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, is wherever you wish it to be. For 5 years, this was a kingdom of shadows, ruled by a ghost. You taught me that the opposite of grief is not happiness, it is life. You brought life back to this home, Rachel. You brought it back to me. He rose from his chair and came to kneel before hers, taking her hand in his. His skin was cool, but his touch sent a jolt of warmth through her. It was the same position he had taken with his children in the council chamber, an act of profound humility and respect. Stay, he said simply, his gaze holding hers. Stay not as a nanny, or an advisor. Stay as you. As the heart of this family. As my partner. In all things. It was not a king's command. It was a man's plea. It was a confession, an invitation, and a promise, all in one. Rachel looked into his eyes and saw the centuries of sorrow giving way to a new, fragile hope. She saw a future she had never dared to imagine for herself, one filled with love, magic, and 2 wonderful children who had already stolen her heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. She had come to this castle to heal a family, and in doing so, she had found her own. Yes, she whispered, her hand tightening around his. Yes. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in a soft, clean white. It was a new beginning. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, not through forgetting, but through acceptance. The shadows were still there, but they were no longer something to be feared. They were a part of the landscape, a place for the light to pool, a testament to the resilience of a family who had learned that the greatest magic of all was not the power they wielded in their hands, but the love they held in their hearts.